In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and in that law, it authorized a study of American education called Equality of Educational Opportunity. The study was conducted by James Coleman. In that study, he found substantial racial disparities. Now, 50 years later, on the 50th anniversary of this report, Education Next is issuing an assessment of what impact that report has had on American education. And in a key article, Eric Hanushek, professor at Stanford University and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, has taken a look at changes over time and what are the possible causes of those changes. I have Rick Hanushek with me here. So, Rick, let me first of all ask you, what did Coleman find? How large were those racial disparities?
Well, the remarkable thing about the Coleman Report was that he tested 600,000 students in the country so that you had an idea of the learning differences among students. And if you look at the 12th grade, you find that the average black student was at the 13th percentile of the average white student. In other words, 87% of all white 12th graders performed better than the average black 12th grader.
That was in math?
That was in both math and reading that we find that.
And then, so has that gap closed over the past 50 years? Have we made progress?
Well, it has closed, but it's closed at a very slow rate, so that now in 2013, according to our national assessment data, the gap is at the 19th percentile in math for the average black student, in the 22nd percentile in math for the average black student in reading.
Wow. So if we continue to make that kind of progress in the future, just how long is it going to take to close the racial gap in educational achievement?
Well, at this rate, for mathematics, it's 2.5 centuries before we can close the gap in math achievement. So I think that this is what classifies as a national embarrassment.
Yeah, well, a tragedy, I'd say. And the question I have then, is it all bad? Is there any part of the United States that seems to be doing better than the rest of the country?
Well, the largest gains actually came in the South. They started with the largest achievement gaps, as you might have expected in 1965. And over the last 50 years, they've come down to be in line with the rest of the country. So that it's a success in closing the gap, but not in terms of the remaining gap.
Well, I know that Coleman spent a lot of time talking about family influences on educational achievement. Is there anything the schools can do? He tended to say the schools didn't seem to have that much of an effect. Do scholars still think that way?
Well, that was the takeaway message from him, that only families mattered and that schools didn't really matter. But more recent work on educational performance has shown that the quality of teachers is sufficient to make up for large parts of this gap. We haven't organized our schools to do that, but we do see that effective teachers can close the gap.
But some people say just poverty is the only issue. If we could eliminate poverty, we could eliminate this gap.
Well, there's no doubt that families are important and that low income has its many effects, partly of which are in schools. But that's something different than saying that schools are impotent in this and that they cannot close the gap. Because just as a quick example, one study that I did in all black students in Gary, Indiana a while back suggested that the best teachers could get a 1.5 years worth of learning gain out of their students. The worst teachers got half a year, so that in a single school year there could be as much as 1 full year of difference in learning depending on which teacher you got.
So if we could improve the quality of our teaching force, we could do a lot to close this enormous gap that remains as large or almost as large as in the days that Coleman wrote 50 years ago. Well, thank you, Rick. I've enjoyed this opportunity to talk with you. As serious and problematic as this situation is, This is Eric Hanushek, professor at Stanford University and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution.